Greetings again. This is my second foray into to share with you primarily the notes that I got from Carrie Argo's class that we had been in, a week-long class up at SMBI that we thoroughly appreciated. And on the first presentation, I wanted to give some background of my understanding of how I had understood him and was applying the principles, the thoughts that he was sharing, and ended up being a sermon in itself. So we're going to try again to get to his notes. But again, I have some opening comments to make. So we will see how far we get. He is a man who that's his current ministry from what I can tell. Came from the outside non-Mennonite world. He didn't mention it, but I think he has a PhD, I would assume, in order for him to have taught at the Army level that he did. He was in the Army for many years and involved in simulation programming and making their models to simulate warfare and to train soldiers with that. So he knows computer programming, and he knows the subject very well, has studied it deeply, and we appreciated very much what he had to say. So I've titled this continuation as Shadows and Screens. And my reason for doing that is, again, my attempt to get a hold of what he is saying and what the concern seems to be, because I'm not an expert on media, never spent that much time studying it, that's why I appreciated what he had to say, and I very much agreed with his concerns. But shadows used to be greatly used by God. The Old Testament is a book of shadows. That's very well understood in theological circles, academic world, I guess, the Christian world, not the true academic. That the Old Testament is a book of shadows. It's God revealing in partiality things which are to come, but they are true shadows, and this is the important concept to wrap our minds around, is that the shadows are true because the things which make the shadows are true. Very important concept to get a hold of. That's how it used to be. And even when you get, and obviously the stories that we read, the Old Testament stories, which I have appreciated lately, the re-emphasis on the Old Testament stories. Just ran across a young guy in the Anabaptist circles who is bringing that back, and it's very much needed. The stories themselves, he said, teach you something because they reflect on your life and so on. But beyond that, if you get into some of the visions that the prophets had, Ezekiel, I think, where he sees rainbows and wheels within wheels and all these strange creatures with multi-heads and horns on here, and you think, what is that? We don't like that much, or at least we don't indulge in it, but it's good to just read those sometimes, and they're shadows. We don't know what they really are, but they reflect something that's real, so it's beneficial. What is occurring, apparently, I become more convinced of it the more I study it and observe what's going on. What is the shadows that are being presented to us, and it's a strange world. The words don't even mean what because you say fiction, because Terry Argo talked about fiction a lot. But as I analyze it and listen to it, he's talking about something different from what I mean as fiction. Because in the writing world where I come from, we had two, in the 60s, we had two kind of giants of men in the literary world who became very concerned about, this is the early onset of this, when they were taking sentiment out of the schools. And C.S. Lewis said that the task of a modern educator is no longer to cut down forests, but is to irrigate deserts. We're dying. We're dying. People are dying. And it's only become worse. So what we have is all this activity, all these shadows dancing around, so I'm saying, and they don't mean anything. We say fiction, but the old fiction meant something. The old shadows meant something because they were backed up by something real. The new shadows are fiction, are truly, can we even say artificial? Because what does that even mean? Anyways. So we are struggling even to define what's going on. But the shadows aren't real because there is nothing behind it. It's taking you nowhere, which I used that in the first sermon. The road to nowhere. There's this road running through your life where there's all this traffic and all this thing. And you think, oh, I'm really going somewhere because I have all this traffic. You end up nowhere with these. So let's back up and go to Proverbs and see us, just to kind of wrap our minds around how God's creation works and how God does things. Proverbs 8, this is speaking, I believe, about creation itself, and it says, does not wisdom cry, and understanding put forth her voice? She standeth in the top of the high places, by the way in the places of the path. She crieth at the gates, at the entry of the city, at the coming in at the doors. Unto you, O men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of men. And it goes on like that. First 10 says, receive my instruction, and not silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. We see this at a very basic level, if you want just a refresher. A walk in the woods. A couple hours spent, or even a couple, 10, 15 minutes spent. I think we're in the time of shooting stars again. I finally gave up. They say there's shooting stars, there aren't any, and I go back inside. But I have never gotten messed up in my mind, never had brain cells burned out by lying there on a blanket or something, or even just looking around the porch and looking at the stars. Never burned one brain cell out. In fact, it made me better, whether I saw shooting stars or not. People know this. The heathen know this. The people who don't even believe in God go to the Northwest and they hug the trees, all this stuff. That's why they're doing that, because there is goodness that comes out of creation. That's why we have these trails, rails to trails things, that it pulls on us. We know that, okay? So nobody ever got messed up walking that trail, not unless he did something sinful or whatever, but just the walk itself always it does something for you, okay? So that's what we have to deal with. Okay, so simply at a basic level, this is just one study that I looked up, and Harry Argo, he had literature after literature, academic literature, studies, and he's very, very alarmed over what academia even is saying. This is not even Christian sources of what, and it's not just one specific thing. You can't pin it down. And let me look at one more scripture yet before we get even to that, because Ecclesiastes chapter 3 says that to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, time to plant, time to pluck up. There's purpose. That's my point. Purpose. Purpose. Creation teaches you that. And God teaches you. Anything right, any shadow that's truly reflecting the real teaches you purpose. And if you want to know where I'm going, what is kind of the rule in my own life, and what I would certainly encourage you, I'm not one, never have been, to have a lot of long lists of rules, checklists of how we deal with this media. Just other people may have that. I just don't. It's not my interest. But I like a principle. So what's my principle? It's purpose. Now ask myself, we should ask myself, what is the reason I'm doing this? Why am I looking at this phone? Why do I need this news? What is it doing to me? And do I like the purpose? Because see, it used to say that where there is no, pain, no gain, something like that. You have to pay the price, then you get gain. That has all been turned on its head now. We're suffering pain and we're getting no gain. And if you want to know why, here it is. The study says that mobile phones, and it doesn't mean mobile phones they're the whole electronic thing, can lead to chemical changes in the brain. So what is the purpose for that? What are you gaining by that? Ask yourself that. Because it is. It's costing you something. Cognitive, this is, and Curry Argo, I believe, mentioned this too. This study said that cognitive capacity, I was going to write the definition of cognitive down, has to do with something with your brain, your comprehension. I think he said they tested students taking a test, had three pools of tests that they did. One, the phone was out of the room. The other, the phone was sitting on the table, turned on, which was the worst result. The best result was when it was out of the room, but if it was laying on the table and turned off, it degraded their ability to do the test. So they are saying, and this is academia, this is backed up with studies, they are saying that cognitive capacity is significantly reduced when the smartphone is within reach, even when the phone is turned off. So one needs to ask oneself, to what purpose am I doing that? This was dubbed the brain drain hypothesis. We are less likely to rely on our own cognitive resources if we know an information source is readily available. What that means, I think, is, well, I look it up on Google so I don't think about it first. So we're producing people who don't have much reasoning powers anymore, much logic. And this is a big one, the fear of missing out effect, where we are always on some level thinking about what we might be missing out when we aren't using our phones. And the tricky thing is, there's that shadow dancing in front of you, but when you get there, it's not real. There's really nothing real in that phone. Nothing real on that. And again, you got to take this with a grain of salt, because there are real articles that get posted on Facebook. There are real things that you can read, and there are people on Facebook that are honest, but the vast majority of the lives that you see on Facebook are not real. And you say, well, they are actually doing that. It's how it's presented. If I could make myself a glorious life on Facebook, just posting pictures and saying what I'm doing, and they'd really think I'm successful. Maybe I am to some degree, but I can make it much better than what it is. And especially, I'm going to say this one, especially to people's relationships, and maybe I'm extra cynical, but if I see a couple, young couple, on Facebook posting a lot of pictures of their dates that they're having, and they're out there and all that, I say they must have a rough marriage. Because why are they doing it? What purpose? What is the purpose? To me, that's the key. I would advise that you drill that into your mind, because that comes from creation itself. There's a reason. There's a time for everything. So the fear of missing out. So there's this haunting that you have to, I must missing out on that world. It is not even real. The way we read online text differs from how we read the printed page. Kerry Argo spent a little time on that, and he must have this access to this research, but he didn't really make a strong case for it other than his preference. He said he still wants a book in his hand, does not want to read it on a screen. I'm hearing a lot of complaints from pastors that I know that everybody is reading nobody brings their Bible to church. They have to read it on their phone. And Kerry Argo, what do you say? I mean, you can't say it's sinful or it's wrong, but the research is saying that we do read. Kerry said there's something about turning that page that does that physical page. So take that for what it's worth, but it's doing something. And again, I want to connect this to what I open up with. You do not get this iffy, fuzzy things when you're dealing with God's creation. So if God was really in this thing, we wouldn't be getting these bad results. Something, we're going to have to ask some questions. We're going to have to, and he quoted Socrates again. He said the unexamined life is not a life worth living. But that's not encouragement either. There is evidence that indicates we understand less of what we read online than what we do in print. A 2020 study found that reading on an electronic device results in lower reading comprehension. Maybe because they're scanning, they're skipping, they're just reading impressions. Researchers have found that people sigh less often when reading on a smartphone. Okay, this is one of the theories that they came up with, why we are reading on the phone and we don't comprehend as much. They say we're sighing less. This impact on respiration is also associated with excess activity in the brain's prefrontal cortex, and reduces reading comprehension. So me being a practical person, I say, well, make myself breathe while I'm reading the article on the phone, but that's what they're saying. There's a concern, and you don't get this with God's things. Okay? Children may not develop their own internal self-regulation mechanisms if they always rely on being distracted by a digital device. I think your best parents are fairly well informed on that. I think Harry Argo gave some years of when a child's brain is developing, doesn't fully, at least up to the teen years. There's a high concern that the child be not exposed excessively to any kind of electronic devices, that he'd be forced to go outside and play, contact with nature, get the mud on his toes, in his hands. The city people don't know that. And this is just my insertion again. We live definitely in a culture that's trying to force people into this artificial world. They're trying to force us into big cities, and they're trying to force us on electronic devices entirely, and it's fictional. In the cities, I've said it before, you're living surrounded by concrete, steel, and pavement. It's all man-made. It doesn't do the same thing for you. Mobile devices become especially problematic when such devices replace hands-on activity that help develop visual motor and sensory motor skills, and it would be especially applied to children as their brain is developing. This is my own stuff. It wasn't stuff that Harry Argo said. that the sleep experts warn that the type of light emitted from your mobile device, the iPad or whatever, might, in fact, and they're pretty convinced it is, it's messing up with your sleep cycle even after you turn off the device. I don't have much personal experience with that. I don't often read, on any kind of device other than some news. But I'm suspicious that one has something to do with it. So if you're having a lot, it's practical observation. If you're having trouble sleeping, you might want to check that one out. Okay, Dr. Tucker, there's a quote from him. In his practice, the most common mental health symptom I see on my patients is behavior frozenness. You want to do something that you clearly have the capacity to do, and instead you stare at pointless screen content you're incapable of shutting off or otherwise waste time indefinitely. In the purpose question. What is the purpose? So, go to our notes now, which should be up there on the screen. And I would gladly attribute all this to Curry Argo, but just for you, honesty's sakes, be aware that even in writing down notes, it's not an exact process. And it's very possible that I put my own feelings kind of angle into. So this comes from my notes, but don't say Harry Argo said this, or if you want to check it out for sure. Okay, he defined, first of all, media as any media that, what are we talking about? Something that transfers or stores information. And media is an extension of human capacities. What media is trying to do is negate the effects of the fall, when man was banished from the Garden of Eden. He spent a lot of time on that one. And while I was in his class, I was nodding my head, yeah, I can see that. I got home and thought about it some more, and not that I disagree with it, that, all this AI stuff, what they're doing with the algorithms, and they are, by the way, what they're doing is they are copying, even in the algorithm, the complicated ones, they are copying something that they find in nature, a rhythm, a pattern, because creation has patterns to it. When God made that way, he thought things out and whatever. He has patterns. A little interesting aside, that it seems to be even in the structure of a natural body, when God finds a pattern that works, he uses it repeatedly in different creatures. A neck works best with 7 vertebrae. Apparently God, that's what he came up with. So a mouse has 7 vertebrae and a giraffe has 7 vertebrae. I found that very interesting. This is what Charles Darwin, well, mess with this a little bit, but the church ought to be very careful about some of this stuff, what they say. Back in Charles Darwin's time, the church was taught very emphatically that all creatures have different body styles. What was the actual word that they used? Structures. In other words, a mouse has to look totally different from a giraffe. You couldn't possibly use that 7-7. The church, they were very strong on it. Charles Darwin, in his own studies, because he was a naturalist, very educated, very good naturalist, studied what God had made, he discovered that these patterns were there, and he said, if I can't believe that, then I can't believe anything else. Not saying that was justification for what he did, but we should be careful, the church, but they aren't sometimes. Religious people get in a religious zeal, and they just go and damage has been done. The scientists still haven't stopped talking about what was done to Galileo with his Earth and Sun thing going around. So back to the effects of the fall. I'm not sure that mankind is really trying to just get back to the garden, because, and this is the reason why, because we've been there once and we weren't satisfied. So I'm going to say Harry Auger isn't quite digging deep enough in his theology. It's just not just that we want to go back to the fall. It's that self-actualization thing. We want to become something on our own. And what we're doing, we're using God's, like all sinners do. They use what God gave them in a wrong way or in some twisted form. So they are using what they see in nature to create these algorithms, to create these tools, but they want to use it for themselves. They want to use it to live forever. They want to use it. Elon Musk wants to go to Mars, and a lot of people are convinced, I don't buy it, that we're going to be allowed to do some of that stuff. But they want to do something with their self, and we're creating this dream world that isn't real, because we are in ourselves are empty. We are not full. We are not God. If we cut ourselves off from God and what He has made and the purpose that He has made things for, we will end up empty. We will end up doing things, and we're going to get into, which is the big concern then at the end, is what if demonic powers get involved with this stuff? So we make this big machine, which is another whole subject. A lot of people are talking about it. They talked about it at the academic level, but at that book club, they don't know. They didn't really say demons, but what if the Satan gets involved? And that's what created so much problems in the garden. You know, we wanted to be this thing. Well, the devil was right there. Like God told Cain, He said, sin lies at your door. So they are trying to do very dangerous things, because the self always does dangerous things. Harry said that media itself communicates. And what he meant by that, the way I understood it, is that if you unquestioningly use these smartphone, iPad, and now you have AI bots you can use to ask questions. If you use those without thinking that you have to guard yourself, that you have to ask questions, that you have to check it with a simple thing like purpose, it will have its effect on you, because it is intending to have an effect. I think that was his point. The thing is trying to do something to us, and it will do something to you even though you aren't aware of it. And I think he's correct on that. So if you use it without questioning, without discipline, without at least trying to examine it, it will do what it wants to do. And that will occur simply by you using it. And I think he's correct on that. You cannot consume media and not receive what is being communicated. Okay, he went into technology, and this was his attempt to deal with the very argument that I'm making, is to ask yourself, to what purpose? So I could tell he wanted to like outlaw technology out completely, because he wouldn't let them record himself. That's where he's going. He doesn't want to be recorded anymore. He doesn't want to be on video. He said he's not convinced that the Holy Spirit goes with the pixels at all. You know, he's not convinced. So it limits him in a large way, but then he also has a lot of activity. He has a lot of meetings, a lot of people asking him. That's really ballooning. So I'm not going to criticize him for it, but that's his stance that he's taking. He's cutting it out completely. And I could tell he wanted to go there. But he did admit that if it's used for a purpose yet, that was allowable. And I've heard that. People have told me that I'm using it to write code with, I'm using it for that, and we're still, let's say, we're still on safe ground there. But Harry Argo did make the big case is that, okay, his theory, or what he feels is going to occur, is that what is coming is going to like overwhelm us, and just because we have these little guards up, it's not going to stop it. Is that true or is it not? Possible. And his example that he used was of a British family, perhaps. At least the father was in the story and the daughter was in the story. And it was some Indonesian country. They were on vacation. They were out there on the beach that morning, and the water started retreating. And all these shells and on sea creatures that hadn't been exposed were exposed, and all the people were rushing down to the exposed water. The exposed shoreline. They're picking these things up, and they're all excited. This little girl pipes up, and she says, "Daddy, I learned in school not that long ago that a tsunami acts like this. The water goes out, but then it comes back in." And he said, the father listened to the girl, and he shouted, he said, "It's a tsunami, get off the beach." And that section of the beach, whoever heard and listened, did not die. It made the British newspapers where they credited this girl with saving all those people on that beach. He said that's the danger that he sees, is we're playing with these things that are revealed to us, but we don't know the water's going to come back. So that's where he left it. That's where I'm going to leave it. And it's a question. Nobody knows the answer of where it's going, what it will do. But let's deal with a little more practical things. So we can, at this point, define, without any question, that reading and writing literally wakes up dormant parts of the brain. That reading and writing creates logical thinking. That reading and writing creates the conceptual mind which sees life as a map. And maybe, I just thinking, well, maybe that explains why people can't see, they can't connect anything. Nope. I struggle with this, but people they aren't able to connect things. This is true, that's true, and it's a pattern. People can't see patterns anymore. Is it all this exposure to media and what we see, is this what's destroying that ability? And the research seems to back that up. Harry Argo, in a very depressed tone of voice, he said, deep reading is done. It's lost. He said, I'm dealing with you. So he doesn't see a bright vision of that. He said, I'm dealing with you Mennonites because, I said, what, and he used the illustration. He said, what would you do if we came up to a pool and there was a dead person at the bottom? You could see he's already drowned, he's dead. So you see him, but there's one over here, two of them, they're still thrashing about. He said, which one would you lend aid to? Well, the obvious answer is you would aid the one that's still moving, that's still thrashing. He said, you people are still thrashing. He said, the general culture is dead. It's gone. He said, deep reading is gone. People cannot think deep anymore. Sound like a little pessimistic illustration for me, but he's exposed to it more than what I am too, and what the general culture is in. But he had a lot of stories to back it up, and I did run across one, two, just this week. It's a school teacher, I believe. She told the story of this. Incidentally, she was talking to her friend out on the street, and they were discussing, can't remember all, it was the Romeo Shakespeare type of level. That's the discussion they were having because they're school teachers. And a 16-year-old boy across the yard, she saw him looking at her a couple times, and then he got closer, and then he finally walks over and he engages them in this conversation, and he is very interested, and she was so blown away because it's like, we don't run across this anymore. And they talked about the Shakespeare plays or whatever it was, deep stuff, and the relationship continued, and he found out she was a teacher and connected with for class, and this was such an inspiration to her, because she said her family, not directly children, but nephews, said she grew up with them, grew around up with them. And she goes over to their house, and they won't even look up when she walks in the door because they're on the screen. Won't even talk to her. Heriagro had a lot of those stories of people that they deal with directly. There's a young man I remember. Don't remember the details of it, but maybe he stayed at their house for a couple of weeks. Harry told him, that's your, he was having a relation, couldn't get along with his parents, couldn't get along with anybody. Harry told him, it's the media, get out of it. In 2 or 3 weeks, went back home. His dad come to him and says, what did you do to the man? He talks to us. We can communicate again. And he had a lot of those kind of stories. So it must be much worse out there than what I'm even aware of what is going on with people. But reading itself develops the mind, while media calls this anthrophe, which means it literally kills your brain cells. It's the wasting away of a part of the body, while deep reading expands the usable part of the brain. And this is not just anybody's opinion. They have studies to back it up. He said that repeatedly. If you will read again a book, get into it, you will truly activate dormant parts of your brain, which can then be used, he said, for other things. Produces a more intense relational stimulation than a human reality can produce. Had a little bit of an argument with that because I didn't think that he was seeing the difference between the old fiction and the new fiction. So, yes, the electronic entertainment media is producing a reality which is more entertaining, more stimulating than real is, but my point would be they're doing it not by reflecting, because you don't have this problem with any of the old fiction, any of the Old Testament stories that, all those visions that Ezekiel's seen, all those, you can read Shakespeare, you can read Paradise Lost, all that stuff. It doesn't overshadow real life because it reflects real life. The reason it's becoming more stimulating and more and messing with the relationship is because it's not real. But saying, what does that word mean? It means different from what the other did. Anyway, I didn't think he was quite making that differentiation, because to me the problem is that the world that backs up what that screen shows you is false. That would be my point. Is it real? It's not. You have to check into it of what it's telling you. What is it saying that's out there? Is that true? It isn't. And he encouraged the return to stories. Sit around and talk. I don't know, and I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, that's going to be a rough one, because there's so many people with so many hurts, so many injuries, myself included. We don't want to talk to people. Okay? So how are you going to get that? How are you going to, so we have that whole issue. But that's what's happening. We're not connecting. So at the least, let's connect with real stories. Let's start telling the Old Testament stories again. Let's tell our children stories. Our daughter sits there too much almost reading. Don't cater to the kids so much, but she reads them stories just endlessly. But they are some of the most natural, alive children. I love them. It doesn't happen by accident. Certainly isn't going to happen if they get hold of a bunch of screens. And look at that. It's going to kill that all. That's going to kill all that. And that was Harry's, the heart of some of his lament was his own growing up experience. He said his dad was in World War II, that generation. And he said that his father around the supper table used to tell them stories, and he said there were these fantastic stories. And he said, our children were always not convinced. He said he did these amazing things after World War II. He met this king and that prince, and he was there, this event, and he'd tell us all these stories. And he said, we were always like, he's just making this stuff up. But he told the stories anyways. He said when we got a television in the house, we didn't want to hear the stories anymore. And he said my dad fought it for a while, but finally he kind of blamed him for it. He said he shouldn't have given up, but he did. He just threw his hands up, fine. So no more stories. They heard no more stories. After he passed, they went through his things, and they found newspaper clippings after newspaper clippings that backed up his stories. They had been real. And Harry said, there I sat on that gold mine and never heard them because of a television screen. And what did I get out of the television screen? Nothing. How am I a better person for having spent hours and hours watching that thing? Ask yourself the question. Have I got more brain cells when I'm left? Have I learned anything? Have I learned anything that I can use in life? Does it make me a kinder, better, sweeter? Probably doesn't. Shut up, I can't hear it. That's what the reaction that it produces. And he mourned that. And one more thing, he did delve a little bit into this, and it goes along with the whole media world, that it's just, we think information is the answer. It's not. It's not. It's relationship. It's stories. And he said, you preachers are going to have to stop lecturing. You're going to have to tell stories again. You're going to have to relate with people. This lecturing is not convincing anybody. And if we are going to compete with the world out there, we have to get back to a real one in the church. I think that's what he's trying to say. We have to get back where church is real, where we're connecting with people again, where we're being honest. And I don't know how that is going to be done. And if I can use my daughter's experience, she came out of her 2 months in prison, and you think, well, what good can you learn out of that? Well, what I heard was how much how did she say it? The pain, the suffering, the withdrawal that she went through from all her friends in jail. And you think, well, what kind of friends would there be in jail? And I saw it. It's because they were honest with each other. He said in prison, you almost don't have the ability to lie. You have to tell everybody everything. They know everything about you. And if in that situation, it creates a bond that for her, she suffered tremendously from breaking that. And I'm like, you expect us to get there in church? No, let alone family, maybe. We have kind of there, but anyways. That, Harry Auger said, would be the real answer to it, or the closer we can get to it, the more, that will be our answer to what's out there. Create the real world, because what they have is fake. And there is no competition once somebody sees realness or fakeness. Don't lecture to them. Don't give them a bunch of rules. Create realness. And we're going to have to do that by relating with each other and stories again. Tell us stories. I'm out of time. That's good enough. Get kind of a flavor of it. But yeah, we thoroughly enjoyed that. If you ever have a chance to hear him, I would encourage you. Just be ready for maybe hearing some things you don't want to hear, but it was good. Okay? And he has a wealth of information. Okay, let's stand and have a prayer, and then we'll be closed.